Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Most people think RMDs are pretty straightforward. You turn 73, the IRS hands you a table, and you have to take this specified amount as a minimum out of your account, whether you want to or not, that there's no wiggle room. But tucked within the rules, there is a hidden exception that doesn't often get talked about. And if you qualify, it can shrink your RMDs by 10, 15, or even 20%. And that means less taxable income to you and more of your money left in your account growing and compounding. The only requirement? You marry someone who is significantly younger than you. So today I'm going to break down this rule, what it is, why it exists, the fine print you need to watch out for, and how you can actually use it in your retirement plan. Normally, required minimum distributions are calculated using what's called the Uniform Lifetime Table. This table assumes that you either don't have a spouse or you have a spouse who's roughly the same age as you, and it gives you a life expectancy factor, basically a divisor. And you calculate your RMD by taking your December 31st balance and dividing by that number. It's the standard rule that applies to the vast majority of retirees. But here's the exception. If your spouse is more than 10 years younger than you, and they're your sole beneficiary for the entire year, you don't use the standard Uniform Lifetime Table. Instead, you get to use the Joint and Last Survivor Life Expectancy Table. And this is really important to stress. Both criteria have to be met. If your spouse isn't more than 10 years younger than you and they aren't your sole beneficiary on your account, you don't qualify for the more favorable table. So what does that mean? The Joint and Last Survivor table assumes a much longer life expectancy, yours plus that of your younger spouse. So it essentially gives you a larger divisor, which gives you a smaller RMD. And here's where the benefit comes in. A smaller RMD means that more money can stay in your account growing and compounding, and it means less taxable income right now. So why does this exception even exist? The IRS designed RMD rules to gradually draw down an account over a retiree's lifetime. But if your spouse is much younger than you, that savings essentially needs to last over 2 lifetimes, not just one. If the IRS forced you to use the standard table, you could drain this account too quickly, and the younger spouse could be left with no or less income when they still have a life expectancy of, say, 20, 30, or even 40 years. Here's an example. Imagine a 75-year-old husband with a 60-year-old wife. If withdrawals were based only on his age, he'd have to take out a larger and larger chunk every year. But his wife could easily live another 30, 35, or even 40 years. Using the Joint and Last Survivor table stretches those withdrawals so the account can better support both lifetimes. So this is one of those rare times where the IRS actually cuts you a break. Now, before you get too excited, remember, like with most government rules, this one comes with plenty of fine print. So let's walk through the key gotchas. First, your spouse has to be the sole beneficiary for the entire year. If you list your kids or a trust or anyone else as the partial beneficiary on this account, you lose this benefit. Even if you list a trust for your spouse, it can get a little tricky unless it qualifies as a see-through trust. My 2 cents here is this is not an area you want to DIY, so if you want to have a trust involved, make sure you work with an experienced elder law attorney. Second, the age gap has to be more than 10 years. And this is one of those areas where the IRS language is very specific. It's not just 10 years younger, it's more than 10 years younger, so at least 11 years younger. Here's what that means in practice. If you're 75 and your spouse is 65, that's a 10-year age gap. That does not qualify. You would still have to use the Uniform Lifetime Table. But if you're 75 and your spouse is 64, that's an 11-year age gap. That does qualify, and you get to use the Joint and Last Survivor Life Expectancy Table. It's also important to keep in mind that the IRS looks at whole years when it's looking at the difference. It doesn't look at days or months, so your spouse can't be 10 years and 1 day younger than you. It has to be the full 11 years because 10 years and 1 day younger would still be looked at as 10 years younger. It has to be 11. Third, timing matters. The IRS looks at who your beneficiary is on December 31st. If your younger spouse sadly passes away mid-year or you change beneficiaries, you go back to the uniform table that year. Fourth, the impact can grow significantly as you age. At age 80, if your spouse is 15 years younger than you, your RMD might end up being about 20% smaller. The difference is more pronounced the larger the age gap. Fifth, this rule only applies while you're married and your younger spouse remains your sole beneficiary. And again, it all comes back to what is listed on the account as of December 31st. If your spouse is listed as your sole beneficiary, you qualify. But if your spouse passes away, if you divorce, if you remarry, you lose access to this special table and you revert back to the uniform life table for that year's RMD. Sixth, smaller RMDs don't always mean better. Sure, it can lower your taxable income today, and it may help you avoid those Medicare IRMAA surcharges, those surcharges on your Medicare premiums if you happen to fall into higher tax brackets, but this does mean that more money stays in those accounts and continues compounding and growing. And down the road, that likely means you're going to have larger RMDs. And if you're concerned about having excessively large RMDs down the road, proactive planning can come into play here, and maybe you want to explore a Roth conversion where you take some of this money in this traditional account, take it out, pay taxes on it today, and get it into a Roth where it would not be subject to RMDs. But base it on your personal situation because it's not a blanket rule that everyone benefits from a Roth conversion. And here's one more nuance worth mentioning. In the kinds of situations we're talking about, maybe a 15 or even a 20-year age gap, it's much more likely that the older spouse will pass away first. And once this younger spouse inherits this traditional IRA, they'll no longer be able to use the joint and last survivors table. Instead, they'll have to use the uniform table or the single life expectancy table, and this could dramatically increase their RMDs and subject them to what's known as the widow's penalty. The widow's penalty is when you end up paying higher taxes on a comparable or even smaller income simply because you're forced to file as a single filer rather than being able to file as married, filing jointly. I have an entire video dedicated to this topic, which I'll link above and down below if you're interested in a bit of a deeper dive. Let's put some numbers to this. Imagine you have an $800,000 IRA. At age 80, using the uniform lifetime table, your divisor would be 20.2. That works out to an RMD of roughly $40,000. But if your spouse is 60 years old, so more than 10 years younger, you can use the joint and last survivor table, which gives you a divisor of 27.8. Divide that same account balance by the larger number, and your RMD drops to about $29,000. That's a 27% reduction, roughly a third less money that you're forced to take out of this account. Let's explore some different age scenarios to see how this changes. Remember, the larger the age gap, the more pronounced this difference becomes. We'll stick with the same $800,000 IRA and the older spouse being 80 years old. Under the uniform table, remember their divisor originally was 20.2, giving them an RMD of about $40,000. Now let's walk through how the numbers change using the joint and last survivor table with a spouse at different ages. With a spouse who's 11 years younger, age 69, the divisor is 20.9. That lowers the RMD to about $38,000. Only about a 3.3% reduction. With a spouse who's 15 years younger, age 65, the divisor is 23.8, which drops the RMD to about $34,000, roughly a 15% reduction. With a spouse who's 20 years younger, age 60, as we previously did in the example, the divisor was 27.8, cutting the RMD to about $29,000, giving us this 27% reduction. And with a spouse who's 25 years younger, currently age 55, the divisor stretches to 32, dropping the RMD to exactly $25,000, a nearly 37% reduction compared to the standard rule. So while the impact of an 11-year age gap is fairly modest, when you have a 20 or a 25-year age gap, it becomes far more pronounced. And if you're working with accounts that have very large balances, this could easily be tens of thousands of dollars that you're not forced to take out and be taxed on today. It's money that can stay in and continue compounding and growing tax deferred. And one last thing to keep in mind, that required minimum distribution, that RMD, is the absolute minimum amount the IRS says you have to take out of the account. You can always take out more if you want to. Also, if your RMD is larger than you would like it to be, aka meaning they're telling you to take out more from this account than you actually need to spend, you don't have to spend this money. You can easily take the money out, pay the taxes on it today, and then simply reinvest it in, say, a brokerage account and put it in low-cost index funds, and that way you keep your fees low, but now this money is still accessible whenever you need it, and it's still part of your portfolio. It's just essentially shifted from one account to another. The point is, you do have options. If this situation applies to you, it is one of the simplest ways to keep more of your money working for you in retirement. The key is to double check your beneficiary designations and make sure you meet the exact criteria. This isn't about gaming the system. It's about aligning your withdrawals with those actuarial tables and factoring in if you have a much younger spouse. This is one of those rare times where the IRS might give you a break, so take advantage of it if it applies to your situation. So what are your thoughts on the joint and last survivors table? Leave them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Over a retiree's lifetime. But if you list your kids, a trust, or anyone else as the partial beneficiary, I should have said it's a Canadian thing. Oh my goodness, that bird is so rude. He's eating my grass seed that I put down to grow grass, and now he's messing with my filming. What is wrong with you? Stop being rude. Seriously. You're eating my grass seed. I'm trying to grow grass. And you're gonna mess up my filming? Honestly, so rude. So rude. I have an entire video dedicated to this topic. Whew. I bit my lip. I don't care. I'm not redoing it.